Welcome to the meeting. This is the Budget Advisory Commission meeting. We're on the table and ourselves for the record. Mike?
Mike Chadwick, internal audit.
Robert Harris, CFO.
Brad Dyson.
Duke Trainee?
Forrest Dunbar.
Tim Steele.
John Weddleton.
Amy Demofsky.
There's Amy Dabowski. You got the real stuff, Amy?
Got it.
The aspartame will get you, you know?
It'll get you everything.
So we've identified everybody. Financial status, Mr. Harris, sir, you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The municipality is in good financial status. We have paying our bills, and we are, I'll sort of say this, the good news for on SAP, I'll save that for later, but you know, we are working through a number of issues with respect to this SAP system, which supports a back office functionality, and pleased to say we're making progress on a number of items, on a number of fronts. Ways to go, but that's what I would say. So my guess is Mr. Wilbur and probably Mr. Moore, they might be, as I did, looking up at the other room.
As we all did.
If you'd like, while we're waiting for Mr. Wilbur to show up, or Mr. Moore, I could dive right into an SAP report if you like.
Why don't you please, sir? Thank you.
So, I just have a few notes, and I wanted to share and then see if you had any questions. I think the best way to characterize it is our SAP system is still software in development. You know, and I was reminded this morning, somebody said, you know, back in the day when we launched PeopleSoft, that 15 years ago, that it got launched, and there were a number of things that had to be worked out. So, from my research, what we're going through probably isn't unexpected. It's certainly not desired, but you know, my sense is that anytime you have a new software system, especially one as comprehensive as SAP, there are just a number of issues on the learning curve for both staff to learn how these new systems work and for us to find problems and fix them. So we're still hovering at about 165 defects. We had 21 closed last week. We have 30 or 40 defects that are ready to go into production. Fixes for defects ready to go into production. We've been at about 150-ish through the end of December. It jumped up, of course, as we found the first of the year as, oh, thank God you're here. Explain SAP. Just kidding. So anyway, as we are trying to do the first of any new thing, we find more defects. It's just the nature of how this.
But it's not the same defects, Robert.
No, these are new and different defects.
That's what I wanted to make sure we're having.
They
No
fix them-
recycling.
Fix them as they go.
Although you do bring up kind of a good point, which is that you know, we've been kind of asking ourselves, what's the definition of stability? When will we be stabilized? Certainly, I think one definition could be when we fix something, we have enough time to test it and make sure that the thing we fixed and the 21 defects we closed last week to move 25 to 40 things into production, that one of those things we moved into production in a hurry because we're trying to fix one thing, didn't break 3 other things. And that's because it's just this, it's a network system, and one touch one part, it can affect another in ways that are really just kind of hard to imagine. Payroll, just kind of walk through some of the departments. Payroll right now, we're testing the W-2s this week. As far as I understand, the testing is going pretty well. And the idea, of course, is that by law, we have to have the W-2s out by January 31st. I was asked this question yesterday. What happens if, you know, in certain instances, we had some employees that perhaps we overpaid or underpaid? The W-2 reflects what we paid them in 2017. That number is what's going to be on the W-2. That's what they'll hand over to their tax accountant or their accountant. And that's what goes through. If we find later in 18 that we overpaid somebody or underpaid them, that then reflects on their 2018 W-2, which goes out in January of next year. So we're hoping that the W-2s are, that form is populated accurately and reflects an accurate number for folks and their pay for 2017. In the area of purchasing, we have a system goes by the acronym of SUSE, which brings to mind either Seuss or Dr. Seuss, but it's not. It's a supplier system, and it allows vendors to update their information without us having to do it. It's a sort of a new functionality of SAP. It's one of the areas where we expect to see some cost savings. We are still working on a number of reports for the DR department. They have some reports that they require to have prepared, and so I think we have good progress there. We brought on a additional resource to help us marshal that reporting piece to make sure that it's a priority and it's worked. In the finance area, our October month end closed on Tuesday. We are working, now that we have that, that was the first month end close we did with all SAP data. Now that we have that sort of out of the way, we're looking to do the November close. We'll have that done by the end of this week, about middle of next week, and December's month end close should be done by the end of January. So those are both positive developments.
We do have a few questions. Do you want to wait till you're done or take them now?
Anytime, Mr. President.
Okay. Let the record reflect Ms. LaFrance joined us. I'm told Mr. Croft may be online too. Tim?
Yeah, my question was with
Thank you,
regards
Eric.
to the enterprise activities, AWW, MLP, because of the way their organizations have handled things, they have had an abnormal amount of payroll errors. Is that working through? Are we getting better at those recurring errors? Or are they still having a significant trouble?
Well, they still have troubles. We have troubles sort of within all 2,800 of our employees. And the way we've approached the world is we have defects we've known about. It's supposed to work one way, but it doesn't. We know about those defects. And what we've asked people to do, what we've asked our employees to do is that if they note or they think something is wrong on their paycheck, to send in a pay correction. So it's a form they fill out, their supervisor send it in. So now we have a large stack of pay corrections. It's entirely possible that a number of those pay corrections have already been fixed because we are constantly, as we become aware of a defect, we put it in a hopper for defects to fix. We assign people, we prioritize it, and we assign people to work on those things. And so it's entirely possible that we have fixed some of the sort of problems that are out there. One of the things that's, I mentioned reports, we want to make sure that we have reporting that gives us the ability to confidently say, yes, in fact, we fixed the problem that you brought up. We also want to, we're at that stage of fixing things now where the pay advice forms that people would get that explaining what a pay correction was, that actually has been influenced and just, empty fields or a lack of sufficient information. So we're at that stage now where we're trying to make sure that people understand, what happened with their pay, what things were fixed, and such as the enterprises. We certainly have had a number of challenges with some of our key departments in the areas of public safety, for example, police and fire, because they have a somewhat complex series of work rules. If there's a police officer working a case and has to stay an extra hour later, SAP is really built around a system in which we load at the beginning of the day, at the beginning of the week, at the beginning of the month, we load what their schedule is. And if they don't work that schedule, then the system, we are not necessarily confident yet that the system's going to calculate pay correctly. So the message we've been getting out consistently to our supervisors is you have two options: work the schedule, have your employees work the schedule, or change the schedule and send it to us. We will input it in the system so that when the employee puts their time in, they get paid correctly.
In real time, we're close to it.
We are getting close.
But you want them to report those exceptions as quickly as they can.
Yes, yeah.
Pardon me for interrupting.
It's all right, sir.
And it kind of, Mr. Tyson brings up kind of another point, which is that,
You done, Tim?
So when you have a system like this, it's, we end up with cases where Parks and Rec, for example, they have to go do a site cleanup, let's say in the summer. We now are, and they may get a call at 4 PM. They need to be out there at 6. So, in some ways, we're asking some of our businesses to change how they do business to accommodate this back office software, which is really not necessarily desirable. you know, this software exists so that we can have the businesses of the municipality do their work. So there's, as I mentioned, we're on a learning curve. We want to figure out how to accommodate the needs of the very different businesses within the municipality, and let them do their work.
Is that all, sir? Mr. France, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for coming in late. I may have missed some of the discussion regarding, as we move towards SAP stabilization and funding. And this builds on some previous conversations we've had. And would you clarify how much funding right now we have available in the budget for the transition? I know that we just approved $1 million for the Peloton extension, and that AMS time and materials, so not continuing with AMS may free up more resources. And I had also heard that there may be 2017 funding that we're still drawing on. And if you could address that.
Certainly. And where I don't know the answer, I will try to answer what I'll find out. Right now, the total project budget sits at about $82 million. And of that, we still have money hanging out, as you mentioned, from 2017 capital money that we, because of efficiencies, because of reduced work through the last quarter, we still have some of that money. We're able to grab that 2017 because it's capital dollars and pull it into 2018 to be able to spend. Alden Thurn has been doing a great job in terms of identifying where that money is and making it available for us to continue this transition support effort that we're in right now, which largely consists of, right now we have about 33 consultants helping us. Some are on site, some are working remotely, to help get us through. And right now we have funding from the IT department. We had money set aside for 2018 that we were doing an accelerated spend on. We think that's going to get us through the end of March, perhaps sometime into April, depending upon what our existing requirements are, so that we can continue the development. And just to sort of talk a little bit about what the consultants do versus what our the staff at MOA. We have 9 people in the IT department, as I mentioned at the last assembly meeting, 9 people in IT who are sort of really helping on the IT piece. But we have within the departments a number of people who are basically subject matter experts who understand, you know, how a grant is supposed to be accounted for, how payroll is supposed to be done. So those people are, well, intents and purposes, working all the time on SAP making it work. But the people who would be able to help us, for example, rewrite a piece of code, those are the 33 consultants. And we don't have much bench depth there. And by much, I mean maybe really, I don't know that I can say we have
1 or 2
on staff who would be competent to sit down and start doing some programming to change a configuration so that, you know, the field that's reporting a specific number would now be moved over to some other area or something. That's beyond our expertise level at this point. And maybe what I'll do is turn to Mr. Rover with respect to the question about AMS funding, anything I might have missed.
Okay. So when we're working on SAP, we're working in 2 piles of money. We're working on capital money and we're working on operating money. All of the money that we are using is already appropriated, either in 17 or in 2018. The capital money that we had in 2017, we were able to continue to use all the way through 2017. And as a matter of fact, given the situation of where the SAP was being developed, we were actually able to continue to use our capital money when we thought we were going to have to start using our operating, just because of the same system. So the amount of operating we had budgeted in 17 for stabilization, it's possible because we spent capital money not operating. Some of those operating monies in 17 for that purpose did not get spent. So they will probably roll into the fund balance probably. In addition to that, when we approved 18, we put $3 million in there to help support stabilization and improvements to SAP in 2018. That's the money that Robert said we advanced spend. So at the end of those things, we're making sure how we're going to end up with, as we continue to sort of build the machine in 17 and 18, we continue to use capital money, and we're not appropriating any more having to continue to use the operating money that you've appropriated now. So the sort of the reconciliation of those two, I don't know how much of the remaining operating money from 17 is left. We will know that when the month ends closed. And then the amount of capital money that we have, we'll know probably at the end of the quarter, because we'll know how these consultants are being spent. But to respect to the money and the contracts that you had at your last assembly meeting, again, we were providing extension to contracts, not approving more money.
Mr. Francis, continue.
Just a quick follow-up. So, if all goes well, stabilization will be complete end of first quarter, end of March, right?
Maybe.
If all would go okay,
Well-
or maybe not.
Well, I think it's reasonable to expect that stabilization will not be complete at the end of March. I know that because beginning in March and moving into April and May, we have year-end close activities where we close the 13th and 14th month, and we have the assemblies of the CAFR. So there are a whole host of activities in there that we have not yet tested.
Okay, so stabilization will probably go through second quarter. Actually, that's what I meant to say, because we'll need to look at it at the end of March. So if all would go well, we'll hit a period of stabilization where we can move into a long-term support model where we have limited defects, right? And they can be tested and enhancements, and ideally the 9 people in AT would be able to handle that post-transition phase.
I don't know the answers to that question.
Okay. And I don't want to take up.
I think that, and part of the reason is I think that all of us were very much surprised at the level of readiness that the software system has presented to us. And as we sort of come to terms with where it's at relative to what we thought we were going to end up with, rather than hazard a guess at the moment, I'm not sure that I want to say that.
Sure.
To try to predict the stabilization period. Stabilization, of course, we have different definitions. Is it when we don't have more problems with particular business units, back office functionality than we did in the past? I mean, for example, in the first 8 months of the year, payroll would have about 60 pay corrections a month. And we had significantly more than that
Right.
each week. So, is it, and how will that be offset by perhaps some of the savings we'll be seeing in other areas? I don't yet have an answer. It's a question I've been following for about a month now. While I've been asking people, how do we define stabilization? What do we think it is? What will it mean for our business units?
Right.
Because it comes back to what resources are available to make sure that we're not.
Go ahead, Suzanne, I'm sorry.
Well, no, and I guess just from a money budget perspective, knowing in advance would be very, as you know, helpful. And I know you all are working on a plan and what the support plan long-term would look like and what resources are available. Because I know other members have ideas for how to use any remaining fund balance too, to do first quarter revisions. And it would be a bummer if SAP took up every bit of that. So that's, I don't want to.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Tim?
Quickly, I hate to take a second bite of the apple here, but
We have 45 minutes.
you mentioned that we don't have SAP programming, the ability to do programming or corrections to the SAP software in-house.
Yes.
Would it be wise to acquire somebody with those skills going forward?
Certainly, that's a great question. Certainly, one of the about a year ago, when we started thinking about what happens after we go into production, the question is how do we staff this? And I remember when I first joined the municipality, one of the models that was discussed was we would have one person in IT who would basically be a contract manager, and we'd farm it all out. That has not appeared to be a successful model. Tacoma, Portland, San Diego, all are using SAP for their back office functionalities, and they have staff anywhere from 27 to 28 people, a combination of technical and functional support people within their SAP system use support. In the case of Tacoma, I think, which is close to 40. So right now we have 9 that we're thinking about after cut our consultants loose. So I think one of the questions that internally we're asking is, what is going to be required for us to reach a point of stabilization? And then we have this system that presumably is going to bring us a fair number of benefits. What size of organization do we need to be able to support that so that we begin to understand and receive the benefits of this investment we've made? I mean, as your CFO, I would like to be able to come back at some point in the future and say, we're making this $82 million investment pay for itself.
Because we have all these different contracts out there for employees, especially in the enterprise activities, that have different things in them, there's always going to be anomalies showing up. And some of them, if they show up on a regular basis, it seems to me you've got to find some programming changes to the SAP to be able to account for it, rather than just fixing it each month. And so that's something to look forward to.
Is that all, Tim? Eric, any questions, sir? Mr. Dyson, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So I suspect that our city, which is pretty unique, has a very complex amount of things that the system has to take care of, and that you can't scale accurately from what Portland does and say they've got 1.2 million, they got 29 people, we've got 325,000, so we can, that doesn't work because the complexity is very similar and the volume of stuff you handle is relatively trivial in terms of what you have to accomplish.
Yeah, exactly right. Yes, that's correct. I mean, City of Tacoma, for example, our budget, the part that we sort of have our fingers directed on is around 600 million. Tacoma's about 425 million.
Wow.
Portland, I think their budget's twice ours. San Diego is 2 or 3 times ours. Maybe Portland's about the same size ours is in terms of total enterprise and general government. Yeah, I think for us, really the question is going to come down to what is that right mix for our organization and the different businesses.
I got it, thank you.
Anything else,
Sorry
sir?
to be right.
Please continue.
Thank you. I wanted to, I've talked about defects. We have, as we've discussed, when we find a defect, we first categorize it, whether it's critical, high, medium, or low importance. Right now, as of a couple, 3 days ago, we're down at about, I would say about 6 or 7 critical defects, probably another 50-ish, 60 that are in the high category. Out of this 160 defects, and the rest are mediums and lows. So things that are critical defects, we expect them to get resolved right away, or I think it really begs the question, just how critical is it if it's going to sit on for a while. And I think it's worth just kind of quickly giving a definition of what a defect is. We've already done this. Defect is what we expected when we turn the system on, and if it doesn't work that way, it doesn't work the way we expect it to, we call that a defect. A defect is not, it'd be really nice to say this column header would say this versus that. It's going back to our blueprinted model and saying, where are we with respect to the information the system's giving us? For pay correction, I know we had a whole host of questions about that. We have 6 consultants working on payroll problems in SAP in addition to our staff. 2 of those consultants are on site this week. We found that to be very helpful. I'm also bringing in a turnaround expert on pay issues to look at larger issues. That's somebody who has seen this show before. And what I want from them is to be able to give us a feel for the lay of the land. What are some tools that are out there that can help us rapidly address the number of pay corrections we have? Are there some reports that we can utilize that we can create, grab, that'll help us identify and address pay correction problems at a substantially faster rate.
Forrest has a question for you, sir, if you don't mind.
No, please go ahead.
Mr. Harris.
Mr. Dunbar?
where is the turnaround expert from? What is his or her expertise?
Thank you. So it's actually 3 people.
Are they from Anchorage or?
No, sir. They're SAP consultants. They're
Gotcha.
both SAP. They're SAP branded person. One person is going to. This is the person I think who's going to be on the ground here. When I say one, I'm going to have a person on the ground. I think here next week. They'll have gone through 3 of these startups where things did not work out the way they had intended to. I think he has 15 to 18 years of experience with all of it, payroll and time. The other person who's a more senior individual, we would have wanted him, but he wasn't available. He, I think, has about 20 years, 25 years on all of it, again, in payroll and time, and I think he has 9 of these turnarounds under his belt, where it's come in, it's not working the way the entity was looking for, specifically with respect to payroll, and what can we do to be able to find features and functionality in the system that we don't know about to be able to help us, or is there something else we should be thinking about doing, either from a management perspective or with the system to be able to help us address pay corrections or just keep rolling in.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Chairman.
you, Dunbar. Go ahead, Mr. Harris. Thank you.
And then lastly, one of the things we have folks throughout the municipality who help us with time administration. So time administrators in various departments. We're asking for help from time administrators to come in and work directly with the central payroll office to be able to look at pay corrections and perhaps speed up as well the process of addressing pay corrections. I think that's kind of about what I would have to say about SAP.
Any other assembly questions on SAP before we go on to the next portion of this? Sure. Mr. Dyson.
Thank you. So nearly 100 years ago, when I went to military office training, there was always a protocol after activity to have an after-action critique. What did we do wrong? What did we do right? What could we learn? That was a deal where everybody took off their rank, at least here.
Yeah.
And will you take care of it? Something like that, can we learn from the mistakes that were made, the things we could have done better in some way or another, kind of capture that institutional memory?
I do plan to be doing lessons learned. That's in addition to some of the other standard project management tools, such as an issues log, a backlog, looking at the various parts and features as we transition from the actual building of the software to us using it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so, and I don't know how to disseminate that information, but I've got a little connection with science. And one of the guys I got to know said one of the problems in Western science is negative results are very seldom published. So a whole lot of scientists that went down laboriously and paid dearly to learn something that didn't work or a bad presupposition, you lose that.
Yeah.
And sadly, one of the things I appreciate about you and this administration, Ethan, is I haven't heard you guys pointing fingers and saying the administrations ahead of us screwed this all up and we're blaming them. Ethan said, sorry?
Even though.
That's a giving starting point, Fred.
Yeah, but it's classy to do that. And Ethan, when I was kind of teasing you about it, he said, sometimes you gotta walk somebody else's dog. And I was thinking, you gotta clean up somebody else's dog, and so on. But I appreciate that about you guys. But that's a huge reason why we're having problems. Is 8 or 10 years of bad decisions before.
I think,
That's
Fred,
a
if
compliment.
they had reached out to other cities that had tried to use SAP, they could have learned the problems those cities like San Diego had found. The last administration never bothered to reach out to other towns to see implementation problems.
Stupid.
If you don't learn from the past, you're going to replicate that same problem as we're doing now.
Darn straight. And oh, by the way, we ought to do that in our policy decisions too.
Well, quite frankly, I suspect somebody's going to do a doctoral thesis on the failure of SAP in Anchorage, Alaska. You could do your doctoral thesis on it.
Yeah.
Lance, excuse me. Anything else, Mr. Harris?
I think that's probably it. I don't know, Alton, if you have any additional comments you'd like to share.
Robert's done a great job, I think, of highlighting that. I just wanted to add a couple of points. I don't know if we talked about what OMB has done for accomplishments over the last 3 months.
No, we skipped that. I thought it was figured you'd do that when you.
So I think that would be something that would be really beneficial, because everybody talks about, the negative things, but many departments, you've heard talk about purchasing, going to be doing SUS, that was never in scope, that's a big deal. OMB has done some fantastic things and carried forward a multi-year that were never in scope, and they've done that all over the last few months. So I think that's something that would be very beneficial for you to all know about. And I'll just give a couple of points of reference, so to speak, just to kind of filter in Robert's comments. I spoke with the lead person who does month in, year end, who's an SAP consultant. She's one of their top people. She's worked on many implementations. She says on average it takes a year before they can close the first month in SAP. And is amazed that we got it done, as Robert mentioned, October was closed a couple days ago, in a couple of months. Doesn't know how it happened, and to understand what the close is, that's all the way through FERC. And if you know the complexities of FERC that's out there, that's a lot more complex than a municipality that doesn't have utilities that has to go to that particular level. So I think that those people that have been working on it, you need to understand what that actually means to say close. It means something different for us than what it means in some of the other municipalities around. And then the last comment I'll make is, Robert made a comment about reports, and we're having a person come back and help out with that. If you remember, reports was the one area that always got deferred, kicked the can, and so forth. So I would hope it's not a surprise here that they focused on defects for several months, and reports, as usual, kind of got kicked. So there's going to be an effort over the next 2 months here to try to focus on that particular effort and be able to kind of get those wrapped up, but they always get towards the end. And also, people now that are using the system have now said, "Oh, I need this information that I didn't think about before." So it is an iterative process. You will always be working on this system. There is never an end. So just there's different levels of how you get there, but I would recommend not having the mindset that there's a date out there that you're going to say, if we hit September 12, we're done, we never have to get upgraded. There will always be something that you're going to have to worry about, and you're going to have staff, and you're going to have good people to be able to run that. And the City of Anchorage does not have SAP qualified people, so you're going to always be using other vendors who specialize in these areas to help. So no matter what the duration is going to be, you're going to need money and funding to pay for experts come in and do whatever you need to do in some of those areas. It is not ever going to end. It's just going to continue in different levels in the future. But Lance's area has done a lot, and he gave a demo on it yesterday to the people. So that would be another positive that I would roll out.
Alden, do you remember we started SAP, we talked about updates built in to SAP. And anytime you do an update, you're going to have some permutations out there that may cause more defects or less defects. But the federal government's already determined what zero employment is. Right now, we're there. You have some people unemployed, but as far as this country is going, we have zero unemployment. And that may be the factor with SAP. At some level of defects, it's zero defects, because that's just the way the system works. I don't know where that level is, but that may be a problem as the federal government's done with employment. We should accept that level as it's solved. So anyway.
So I'm going to ask please, 1 minute.
Lance and Dan, you guys are next to talk.
I'll let Dan, depending on which one you want.
Okay, and I'll be real
So
fast.
tell us how we're doing.
Sure. So on the revenues, last time I reported to the Assembly, I talked about us being quite behind with SAP, just because there were some issues in terms of getting departments to use the system. Since that time, we are majorly caught up with revenues. So we have a much better hold on where 2017 revenues are. We still have a couple more months to be posted in part of the closing that's going to occur. But I can say that so the best projected outcome for revenues right now would be about $2 million positive variance, which is consistent with what's said in the past. There is some potential downside in the area of tobacco tax. November came in weaker than we thought it might. So there could be about a $500,000 negative variance in tobacco. And there are a couple other revenues. Marijuana is just slightly off what we were predicting before. At one point it was 1.5 million, now our projection is 1.3 million for the year. And the only other major variable that we don't know, we don't have enough information to project, is investment revenues. I think the hardest hit already has occurred. That was in September. And I think it's probably not going to be much worse of a hit for November, December, but until we see the final postings, we don't know. So I'd say the range is $1.5 to $2 million positive variance is the best we can project right now.
Mr. Dyson, sir.
Yeah, thank you. All of us are driving around seeing vacant office space, strip mall space and everything. How long after the vacancy rates, and the value of commercial property decreases, do we ever see, how long does it take for us to ever to see a property tax income go down?
Well, there's at least a 1-year delay. I mean, just because of the way we
Sure.
do values here. Beyond that, we can't see a decline in the taxable value. However, with the assembly setting the budget and the mill rates, there's the values can go down, but you still have whatever the tax cap allows you. So really, what's driving it economically would be the change in population, the change in inflation. The vacancy rates are really not going to affect you as directly
Mr. Dyson?
in terms of lowering your amount of revenues. So.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my mind spins, so
Sure.
you're saying that we operate instead of on the reality of the economic environment, we go by the somewhat arbitrary things that are in the code. But I got it, you did say the decrease in commercial property value ultimately will have some effect. My guess is that's less than 10%,
Oh, yeah.
much less. Nothing that I should stay up at night over.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
John, and then Tim.
Well, no, the decrease in values will never have an effect on the amount of revenue, because all that the property values do is decide your share of the budget that you'll pay. So if every value everywhere can cut in half tomorrow, your share of that budget stays the same. So they're not connected to the city, which is a good thing in many ways, because when things tanked in '08, cities ran out of money
Yeah.
for something that was fairly artificial.
Yep.
You know, they had trouble, we didn't, because we do ours different, but it does make that disconnect in a way. If you think government should shrink as the economy does, we don't have that connection to our property.
Not directly. Yeah.
That's true.
Fascinating.
We do see a lot of flattening because of population. That's actually gone down, and inflation has been super low. So really the growth in government is the opportunity to sort of grow at a certain maximum rate is driven by a tax cap. Tax cap's really been, there's a real big hard lid on it right now. So
Tim?
Well, appraisal has something to do with, the city appraiser, with what you pay in terms of taxes.
Correct.
Mine is high right now. I think it's high. I think it went up too high, but.
You follow
as-
the appeal form?
As we're having a downturn in the economy, do they adjust those appraisals down on an annual basis?
they will. It's just, there's
I'll
at
be
least
looking
that
for my
1 year
green
lag.
card next year.
Yeah, okay.
Huge lag time.
Yeah.
You can file an appeal form and pay the $100 and go through the process.
I'd rather just go yellow.
Any other questions from Assembly members? Dan, I've noticed that we have less hotels being built. There's still one going up on Tudor Road,
Is that-
right next to Lowe's.
Tudor
They're paying the
Street, yeah.
foundations right now.
Yeah, that's been kind of sitting there for quite a while.
They're pouring concrete today.
Yeah, I don't, that's what we've seen too, is there's not a lot of new announcements. So I know on the national level, because the Amway Trust Fund invests in real estate, including commercial, our main real estate investor they've always had a pretty small slice of pie in real estate, in hotels, I should say, and they are definitely getting out of hotels. So there's a nationwide trend to hotels are not as much opportunity for real estate going forward. So it's been that way for the last year or two.
What's causing the downturn in tobacco?
Uh,
It's still about, what, 23 million?
Yeah, it's about that. I don't know if it's a downturn. It's one of those, more likely than not, it's just a timing issue. So it's just the way the purchasing habits are. With Sam's Club closing, that's probably also going to affect timing because they're one of the distributors that sells tobacco. So
Would a tax on vaping help?
it's
Because
very
vaping's an
small.
alternative
I think it's like $100,000 or something. It's very small what that would generate.
No, but some of the THC is moving into vaping.
Mhm.
Talking to the people that are making
Mhm.
vaping capsules with THC into it. I'm trying to figure out some way to capture that market.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't looked into it in depth, but I mean, it's, when we looked at it previously, it was very, very small what it would generate. So it's also harder to trace because it's not as heavily directly regulated as tobacco products. So, yeah.
Forrest?
Yeah, I was actually going to bring that up because Rose had done some research for me, and maybe that was with you. I thought it was more, maybe it was a couple 100,000. I don't know if Rose remembers, but so just for my colleagues, because this is a good place to discuss it, tobacco vaping, it hasn't really been shown to be a particularly good cessation tool. People are switching over to it, and they're exempt from our tobacco taxes. So they don't pay the same tax, don't pay anywhere near the same tax as cigarettes or other tobacco taxes, products like chew or snuff or anything like that. So it's kind of an interesting little gap in our law right now, where people are switching over to it. And it's unquestionably healthier than cigarettes, but it's not healthy and doesn't appear to be a cessation tool. And it is at the moment tax-free, so, or at least from well, I don't know if an opportunity, but certainly if I was a purveyor of traditional tobacco products, I would be pointing to it as sort of an unfair advantage that they have. But if I mean, the research that Rose did showed that, as Dan said, it wasn't a huge market. It was the tax would raise I thought it was a couple 100,000.
It's in that range, yeah.
But yeah, nowhere near the millions that come in from cigarettes. Although I was proposing, when I had her do the research, I was having her propose a much lower tax than the current tax we have on other tobacco products and on cigarettes.
What if I understand, talking to the teachers out there in the school district, the kids are using vaping on the concept that it doesn't affect them because they're using THC to vape with. And so we're not using drugs, we're vaping instead.
But that's a little bit different because
And they're
THC,
still doing
those
it.
products are taxed under our cannabis taxes. Those concentrates that they vape are taxed. I think the concern with the tobacco products with children is that they can be bubblegum flavored and cotton candy flavored, and they're much easier to conceal because they release a water vapor, so you can smoke them between class or what have you and not have the smell of them. So it's an interesting issue. Other municipalities and states have started to tax vaping products, and we haven't. Not just the pods, but the actual pipes themselves. We haven't done it yet.
Fred?
Fascinating conversation. The parts of the Alaska economy that are still expanding, certainly the two that stand out is tourism. I suspect we'll go over 1.1 million cruise ships this year. And we continue to be, as terrorism, all those things happen, we're still an exotic and safe place to come. We don't have a good way of capturing any of that part of the economy is doing. The other one's healthcare, and we keep getting more and more healthcare workers probably needed, but that doesn't help our income. And then you guys just shine a light on something that's one of the perverse incentives. All of us want less alcohol problems. All of us want less tobacco, and darn it, the revenue, so we don't want to get out there encouraging people to smoke more because we need the income. It's like tightening down the traffic laws so we can get more income from the cops and stuff. So, ultimately, I think we ought to have a serious consideration of another way of collecting revenue. And, the two options, of course, are sales tax, which I would support, income tax, which I wouldn't. Those have got to be a part of the conversation. Where, just like with Mr. Harris's kingdom, we've got all our eggs in one basket. That darn system doesn't work. We are dead in the water, and we have tied most of our income to the property tax. In my persuasion, we need to spend some time working on that. decide where we want to go.
You know, Fred, we have tried to diversify like we did with our tobacco tax. And that's one that's worked for us because we helped to diversify. I remember we had the downturn in the economy. We saw towns like Las Vegas that were just sales tax driven go bankrupt because they had no property tax income coming in. And their town, other side towns that have property tax only have the same problem. You've got to have diversity of income coming in to make your town
Absolutely.
viable.
Absolutely.
So, yes, Amy.
I'll just add, part of this conversation, it's not just about where we can find revenue and diversifying revenue, it's cutting government. To be honest with you, you have a city of 300,000 people, a budget that's exploding over all records for 500,000. I think it's significant. And the people in my district are asking, as the economy shrinks, as people start laying people off, the only thing that's getting bigger is government. And so at what point do you force that change to right-size government to the population? And I think that's a valuable part of the conversation that can't be overlooked.
Harris, in line with that, if we do go forward and sell MLNP, theoretically that should move a whole portion of city employees off of SAP into True Gas
Does SAP
Electric's
go with them?
system.
Possibly.
You guys get SAP?
Negotiating, they'll buy a big piece of SAP from us.
It won't be our problem then, will it? So anyway,
Do they know that? Let's go.
Yeah, until after they buy.
anything else, Dan?
Well, just to follow up on a couple things said, it is true in other jurisdictions when the whole economy around the nation crashed, there were some variances of like 20-some% that relied a lot on sales tax. So it can be a very, very volatile source. But the other thing is if MLNP is sold, if the voters approve, and if there's a large amount of money and say it goes into the MOE trust fund, that's going to be a whole new source of revenue for the city that is very flexible in terms of it's area-wide money and you can use it however you wish. I mean, you can pay off debt, you can support operations, whatever. So, and just one final side note: the trust fund for last year, the market's been doing great. Trust fund earned about 16%. It did really, really well. So, so things are looking good there.
I'd like to get on
I love
that.
that truck market.
Yeah. It's been super strong. So,
Thank you. Lance?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize for being late. So for
Apologize for switching rooms on you.
Yeah, no,
You probably went upstairs and was down here.
I know, but I am upstairs, so mind that. So for 2017, as it was mentioned earlier, and October has closed. I can't tell you exactly how we're going to end 2017 until November closes, December, and all of the reconciliation for the grants. The supplementals that you guys have, the supplementals and the grant appropriations that you've done in the last quarter, we need to make sure that all those are loaded in as a revenue stream. Dan mentioned most of those are in there. And so as the month end for December closes, we'll be able to give you a better reflection of that. One of the things that Alden mentioned is one of the tools that we do have available right now, and directors have the ability to do it, assembly members have the ability to do it, and send out some simple instructions. We now have the ability to look inside SAP in 2017, similar to the way that you might have done in PeopleSoft. And so we have a mechanism to do that. We shared that as a demonstration to the directors. While the information that's in there is only as good up to the end of October, so November, December information, all those things. So as all of the budget numbers come in, we'll have a better ability to report to you how we ended in 2017. As it relates to 2018, I think I might have mentioned it, this is our last meeting, two important sort of milestones and expectations that we were able to achieve inside the budget side of the house. Typically, when we run IGCs, intergovernmental charges, from everything from the beginning of the allocations all the way through the utilities for purposes of the RCA or FERC. Normally, that takes us 3 days. It includes a weekend. It includes overtime and IT people. We did it in 3 minutes, and we did it twice. And so that worked really well. The other thing that we were able to do, we loaded the 18 budget from start to finish in 5 minutes. Normally that takes us 3 days. And so the system took us a long time and a lot of care to make sure that all of the connections between the funds, the purchasing, utilities, everything. It's very complex. The fact that we were able to do that so quickly that's definitely a great efficiency for us. And so I think the other thing that we'll be able to do in the very short term is department heads will be able to see and manage their funds individually without sort of our approval to a limit. And that way, if somebody wants to do a purchase, once they get, for example, the assembly, if the planning department has a supplemental appropriation, they can load it inside the system. You approve it on a Tuesday night. If they're watching after you approve it and we get confirmation, they can load it on Wednesday morning. It comes to me in the afternoon and it's live before the end of the week. And so they can actually start doing that. That's a great
Lance,
idea.
I suggest you wait till Thursday, in case a assembly member decides to reconsider.
I'm talking
We can, I know,
anybody.
but we can reconsider any action. I'm just saying, when you're
Oh,
looking
yeah.
at that,
Oh, okay, yeah.
Thursday would be better than Wednesday. I hate for you to get down the street and realize some assembly member just put a hold on
Oh,
it
good
for
point. Yeah.
the next meeting.
Good point. So I think those are the high points I wanted to show you. What we're doing at OMB right now is we're working with the bond fact sheets. We're starting to put together that information. And we heard from a couple assembly members that the community council survey we put out last year, we didn't get a very high response, so we're going to look at a process to improve that, and we're starting now. Our plan will be to reach out to the Federation of Community Councils at their February meeting, so that when they get notice for March, they'll have March, April, and May, and then their surveys will be due at the end of May. So in light of some of the comments we did last year, we heard, we're going to improve the process a little bit this year to get a little ahead of the ball.
Well, they were noticed last night at the Federation meeting. Get ready for it. So you guys are already taking that step to let them know. Tim?
Yeah, I'm glad to see, or I'm glad to hear the advantages that we're getting from it, because we hear all the problems and so on and so forth. Those are the things that sold us on going out and doing this way back when, 5 years ago, I guess. Anyway, so that's a good thing, and we ought to, I hope you will continue to make those kinds of reports to us about, hey, the way we were doing it would cost us, the way we're doing it now, it's costing less, hopefully. The other thing is I've been dealing a little bit, or at least talking to some of the unions with regards to contracts for the enterprise activities. And it just came to my mind that at some point it might be good for us to have somebody aware of those contracts, to look for changes in contracts when we get a new one.
Give us a list, Fred.
That may change the work rules such that we can anticipate problems coming in the payroll.
Are you referring to labor contracts or professional
Yes,
services?
labor contracts.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Time and payroll.
Anything else, Tim?
No, that's it.
John? And then Fred?
You said you sent out to community councils, is that the CIP request?
We are going to, John, we are prepping to do that. We heard normally we send out the notice in latter part of February, early part of March, and for some reason, the response that we got last year was pretty weak, so we're trying to figure out a better way to make sure that they get that. What
The
we're
mayor's
gonna do is reach out
representative
to-
last night at the Federation meeting told the Federation assembled that we're going to be moving early on this. We'll be dealing with you in February on it. So that was last time.
And having been on the community council side of that for many years, people get those and they say, wait a minute, we wanted that thing removed, it's still on there.
Right.
We have this on there, I don't see it on there. And there's no feedback on what was done. Maybe things were put on, and maybe it wasn't my committee council, but say, hey, these 100 projects were added and 5 were done.
Right.
Okay, something was done with this, we just thought it's a lot of work, we don't see any result. So that made people just give up, quite bothered.
Okay, I may reach out to you if you have some suggestions on the feedback loop as to if they put something on there and it didn't show up, how come it didn't show up? And then if there are things on there, because community councils are one source of projects that we consider. They are not the only source of projects. We get projects from departments, and sometimes the department might have a project that community council doesn't have, and if it's in that community council, it will show up on the community council list, and that's fine. We start with the departments. We ask them to give us any projects that they have on their project list from, in a CIB or something like that, and then ask them. If the community council says we need to take that one off, I mean, we take that into consideration to take it off, but it doesn't automatically come off.
Yeah, no, I've seen that, and I don't argue with it, but there is an expectation in
Explanation
many
as to
community
why.
councils that, well, we are the veto and authority power. So those they're the minor and Cliff Burns is the major, so you want to deal with that. But even if you just said that, this was left on there because PMNE said it's needed or else all the toilets will stop out.
You're suggesting we do that when we send the survey out?
Yeah, because then it's like, oh, we did it last year, there was a result, so now we're interested in doing it.
Okay, I think we can evaluate that.
Lance, many community councils get the list, and they said, we told you guys 3 years ago to get rid of that project. Why does it keep reappearing every year? And John is saying, being a community council president myself, we would see them show up year after year. We'd kill them off. They'd be back the next year. It's like, don't they understand? No. So it would be good if you let the community council presidents know why it's still showing up on there. Because they figure if they voted to get rid of it, why is it still there? John, you had the same problem when you were community council president. Anyway, Fred?
Yeah, so, Tim, I appreciate you bringing up the labor contract. And if you look at the city's expenses, labor is a very significant part of it. And I suspect none of us are militantly anti-union, but where we get cross-threaded is on the work rules. And the labor union leadership may be very altruistic citizens, but they have a responsibility to look after their own constituency that isn't the same as ours. And all of the things that they come after in a contract may not be in the public interest. And there's very valuable input and so on. But if I was mayor, I would say to the unions, we're in a tight spot here. We're not going to mess with your pay. We're not going to mess with all of the benefits that are in place. But you guys have got to stay out of management business and let us manage the workforce, in something like the most efficient way, paying attention to safety and all those kind of things. But we have, it's been terrible on the state level, and I suspect it's better here, but there's some real perverse incentives in some of the contracts, and a lot of it has to do with building income for retirement and all of those things that preclude some of the best management practices and ultimately the most efficient delivery of services. And I think most of our union members here realize they're a part of the community too, and it's a team game and so on. But Mr. Steele has, in my view, put his finger on one of the important things that we've got to pay attention to in suing contracts. Kind of an aside, but when I tried to work a bit with DOT and militia, there are people I've known very well. One of the ways that inhibits the rationalizing of who clears what roads and making that all work better for everyone is labor contracts. And we ought not to have those somewhat artificial barriers to keep us from making good public policy. That's a long-term thing, but we've got to get there in order to do our job responsibly. Sorry, I'm preaching, but what I just said is, I believe, profoundly true.
Thank you, Fred. Amy, last comment before we
Just a quick
adjourn?
question, where are we standing with potential grievances or grievances that have been filed associated with SAP? I think it'd be, it's an important factor. I don't want to be shocked if, I keep hearing from union members that are contacting me that they're filing, but I just don't know if it's happened. I don't want to be caught off guard.
We have to check with employee relations, because they're the ones that would receive them, and how many and where they're from.
Because it could have a significant fiscal impact, so that would be helpful too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else from the group? If not, we're adjourned. Thanks for being here.